Well, Michelle Grattan, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
It's been a big week at home and abroad, but we'll focus first on the G20 as the largest group of international leaders ever to come to Australia begin to gather for Brisbane. From Tony Abbott's point of view, is it going to plan?
It's been a bit difficult in this run-up because this week we've seen the big new deal between the United States and China on climate change beyond 2020, and Tony Abbott has not wanted this topic to be more than absolutely marginal at this meeting. Now, what this agreement's done is have everyone talking about climate change. So that's been awkward. Ebola is another issue that the Prime Minister would prefer to be not too much at the centre of things. But David Cameron, before he left Britain, tweeted that the world economy's problems and Ebola were the two big topics for the meeting. So where Tony Abbott wants to keep everything on the economy and jobs, other people want other items to be considered as well in a full way.
And then there's Russian warships around as well. Is this a distraction?
Well, it was somewhat. It's a bit of a provocative action by the Russians. You can imagine them taking some enjoyment from the Australian publicity of this manoeuvre. I don't think it means anything, but it's just another step in the saga between President Putin and the Prime Minister. Tony Abbott had his chats with the President at APEC. He'd hoped that that would clear the way for that issue not to be too much prominent at the summit, but of course the run-up has seen a lot of publicity, especially in the tabloid press, about those ships.
Sure. And then finally in your column you say that the government will get the results it wants out of the G20 summit. Walk me through that.
Well, the thing that it wants particularly is the endorsement by these countries of a growth target of 2% over the next 5 years, over and above what global growth would have been. And Australia has had other countries put in these action plans to get that sort of growth, reform plans. There are some 1,000 initiatives from all countries, and Australia, incidentally, has put in some of its budget plans, like the deregulation of university fees, that haven't even been approved by the Senate. So many people have said, well, that's a bit cheeky. But this is in fact bedded down because these communiques, remember, are actually written mostly well before the meeting, some finishing touches at the meeting, but mostly written before. So we know it'll get that. Now, of course, whether that means a lot in the long term is quite another matter because the governments have to deliver on these plans, and one of the questions will be what monitoring operation is set up by the meeting. But nevertheless, it will be able to say afterwards, well, the target growth is 2%, or I think even a little more. And there are various other things on taxation, banking and so on that it will get out of the meeting. The big challenge for Tony Abbott is to stop these other issues, or Australia's attitude on these other issues more precisely, climate change, Ebola, taking all the headlines. And I think his strategy would frankly be best to just go with the flow on these issues, not have it seem that Australia is saying, no, we don't want to consider that.
Well, I can't finish without mentioning the colour and movement of the week locally, the tensions between Jackie Lambie and Clive Palmer. Palmer purportedly sacking Jackie Lambie's Chief of Staff and challenging her to go for the leadership and so on. How are you reading all of this?
I'm reading it as a party that's very tense. I think that Jackie Lambie has always been a bit of a one-off in this party. Her issue particularly is the government's pay deal for the Defence Forces. They're going to give a deal that's less than inflation. She's, of course, an ex-Defence Force person. She's outraged by this. She said she will vote against all government legislation unless it's changed. Clive Palmer previously has tried to just let these outbursts by Jackie Lambie go by the board, just calm things down. But this week he's decided to take her on. He's accused her of dramatic tactics. He's said that what she's doing is not appropriate, that she hasn't gone to the party, that there's not a disagreement about the issue itself within the party, but to make these sorts of threats is just not a sensible way to proceed. He's also said that if she's unhappy with his leadership, and she has been quite critical, then why doesn't she challenge for leadership? Where this will all end is hard to predict, but there has been some talk of Jackie Lambie perhaps teaming up with a couple of other senators, but crossbench senators, but I think good luck with that. I think that she is an individualist, and she's a very uncomfortable bedfellow wherever she is.
We'll pick this up next week, because the higher education reforms are coming back into the Senate, and that's an area where she's expressed strong views. But until then, thank you, Michelle Grattan.
Thanks, Stephen.